You know that feeling when you're swimming up from deep water and everything's fuzzy and distant? That's exactly how I felt coming out of anesthesia. My throat was dry, my head was pounding, and for a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The surgery, the weeks of worry leading up to it, and Sarah, my daughter, promising she'd be right there when I woke up. "Don't worry, Dad," she'd said, squeezing my hand as they wheeled me into the operating room. "I'll be the first face you see when you open your eyes." But as my vision cleared and the fog in my brain started to lift, I found myself staring at an empty chair. Not just empty, but cold. Like no one had been sitting there for hours. The little pillow she'd brought from home, the one she always used when she stayed over, was gone too. I pressed the nurse call button, my heart starting to race in that way that had nothing to do with the surgery. When the nurse came in, all cheerful and professional, I asked about Sarah. "Oh, your daughter," she said, checking my IV. "She left about an hour after you went under. Said she had some errands to run." Errands, during my surgery. The surgery I'd been terrified about for weeks. The one where complications were possible, where I'd needed someone there. Someone I could count on. I tried to tell myself she'd be back soon. Maybe she went to get better coffee or pick up groceries for when I got home. Sarah had always been thoughtful like that, always thinking ahead. She was my responsible one, the daughter who called every Sunday, who remembered my birthday before I did. But as the minutes ticked by and became an hour, then 2 hours, something cold started settling in my chest. This wasn't like her. This wasn't like my Sarah at all. That cold feeling in my chest turned into full panic when I reached for my phone to call her. You know that moment when your hand searches for something that should be there and finds nothing? My phone wasn't on the bedside table where I'd left it. I pressed the call button again, and when the nurse came back, I asked her to check the little closet where they'd put my clothes. "Could you grab my wallet from my jacket pocket?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just want to make sure everything's secure." She came back with my jacket, but her face... I'll never forget that expression, confusion mixed with something that looked almost like pity. "Sir, there's nothing in these pockets." "Are you sure you brought a wallet?" My heart dropped. Of course I'd brought my wallet. I'd specifically checked for it that morning, worried about insurance cards and identification. I'd even grabbed extra cash in case Sarah needed anything while we were here. "My phone," I said, my voice coming out shakier than I wanted. My phone was right there on that table. The nurse looked around, even checked under the bed. Nothing. That's when she suggested we call security, and that's when I knew. Deep down, in that place where fathers know things they don't want to know about their children, I knew this wasn't a mistake. While we waited for security, my mind started racing. My car keys had been in my jacket too, my credit cards, the spare house key I'd given Sarah months ago when she was going through her divorce, when she needed a safe place to come and go. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in, and for the first time in 28 years of being Sarah's father, I started to wonder if I really knew my daughter at all. I kept thinking about how we'd gotten to this moment, lying there in that hospital bed with nothing but a thin gown and the growing certainty that my own daughter had robbed me. See, Sarah had been struggling, really struggling. Her divorce had been brutal. That husband of hers, Marcus, had cleaned out their joint accounts before filing the papers, left her with nothing but debt and a broken lease. As her father, what was I supposed to do? Let my little girl end up on the street? So I'd helped. More than helped, if I'm being honest. I'd paid for her lawyer, covered her rent for 6 months, even bought groceries when she was too proud to ask. When she needed a car, after Marcus took theirs, I co-signed the loan. When she couldn't make the payments, I took them over entirely. "You don't have to do this, Dad," she'd say, but her eyes would fill with tears of relief every time I wrote another check. "I'll pay you back as soon as I get back on my feet." I never expected her to pay me back. That's not what fathers do, right? You help your children when they're drowning, no questions asked. She was my daughter, my baby girl, who used to fall asleep on my chest watching Sunday football, who called me her hero until she was 13. The thing is, I'd started to worry about the money. Not because I begrudged her a penny of it, but because my retirement savings were getting thin. The surgery I just had, I'd been putting it off for months because of the cost, because every spare dollar had been going to keep Sarah afloat. But she'd insisted on being here for the surgery. "Let me take care of you for once, Dad," she'd said. "You've done so much for me." This is the least I can do. I should have seen it then. The way her eyes wouldn't quite meet mine when she said it. When the security guard finally came to my room, he was this older guy, probably close to my age, with kind eyes that had seen too much. He pulled up a chair and asked me to walk him through everything, and that's when the pieces started falling into place like a horrible puzzle. "Your daughter," he said, checking his notes. "She was asking a lot of questions at the nurse's station yesterday. About your surgery time, how long you'd be under, when you'd be coherent again." He paused, watching my face. "The staff thought she was just worried about you." But I knew better now. She'd been calculating, planning. He told me they'd pulled the security footage from the hallway cameras. Sarah had left my room twice after I went into surgery. The first time, she'd gone straight to her car in the parking garage. The second time, she'd come back with a larger purse. "We can't see what happened inside your room," he explained, "but the timing lines up with what you're telling me." Then he asked the question that made my stomach drop. "Has she had access to your personal information recently? Bank account numbers, social security number, anything like that?" Oh, God. 3 weeks ago, when I'd been preparing for the surgery, Sarah had helped me organize my paperwork. She'd been so helpful, so caring, making copies of everything. "Just in case something happens, Dad. Insurance cards, bank statements, even my social security card because mine was getting worn out." I'd thought she was being responsible. I'd been proud of how mature she'd become, how she was thinking ahead, taking care of her old man. She'd even set up online banking on my phone because "It'll be easier for you to keep track of everything, Dad." The security guard must have seen something in my expression because his voice got gentler. "Sir, I think you need to call your bank. Right now." Using the hospital phone felt like admitting defeat. But what choice did I have? My own phone was gone, probably already being sold somewhere or thrown in a dumpster. The bank's automated system kept asking for my account number, which I couldn't remember without my wallet. And when I finally got through to a human being, I had to explain the whole humiliating situation. "I'm calling from a hospital," I said, my voice cracking more than I wanted it to. "My daughter took my wallet and my phone, and I think she might be using my accounts." The customer service rep was professional but distant until she pulled up my account. Then her tone changed completely. "Sir, I'm seeing some unusual activity here. Large cash withdrawals starting about 3 hours ago." 3 hours ago? Right when I would have been deepest under anesthesia. Most vulnerable, most trusting that my daughter was watching over me. She rattled off the numbers, and each one felt like a physical blow. 300 from the ATM at the hospital. 500 from the branch downtown. Another 800 from a different location across town. Sarah had been busy while I was unconscious, hitting my daily withdrawal limits at multiple banks. "We'll freeze the accounts immediately," the rep assured me. "But sir, I'm afraid there's more." More? Of course there was more. Someone had attempted to transfer money from my savings to a checking account I'd never seen before. The transfer had been declined because it exceeded my online limits, but the attempt was there, logged and time-stamped. She'd also tried to increase my credit limit, probably planning to max that out too. After I hung up, I just sat there in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. The physical pain from the surgery was nothing compared to this. I was stranded 20 miles from home with no money, no transportation, and no way to even prove who I was without my ID. But the worst part? I kept thinking about calling Sarah, kept wanting to hear her voice tell me this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Even knowing what she'd done, part of me still wanted my little girl to come back and make it all okay. Over the next few days, as I recovered at my neighbor's house, because yes, I had to call my 70-year-old neighbor Jim to pick me up from the hospital like I was some kind of charity case. The full scope of what Sarah had done started to emerge. My credit card companies called. Someone had been making online purchases, trying to stay under the radar with amounts just small enough not to trigger immediate fraud alerts. 200 here, 300 there. Gift cards, mostly, which could be resold for cash. But it was my brother Mike who delivered the worst news. He called me that Tuesday, his voice tight with anger, and something else I couldn't quite place. "Listen," he said, "I need to tell you something about Sarah, and you're not going to like it." Turns out, she'd been calling family members for weeks before my surgery. Casual conversations, asking about my routine, my habits. She'd asked Mike if I usually carried a lot of cash. She'd asked my sister Linda about my banking habits, whether I used online banking or preferred going to the branch. "We thought she was just worried about you," Mike said, and I could hear the guilt in his voice. "She said she wanted to help you manage things after the surgery if you needed it. We thought it was sweet." Sweet. My daughter had been conducting surveillance on me through my own family, and they'd helped her do it because they thought she was being a caring daughter. Then Linda called. Sarah had asked her about my house security, whether I had an alarm system, what time I usually went to bed. "She said she wanted to check on you sometimes after the surgery without waking you up," Linda explained, her voice breaking. Oh God, what did we help her do? That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the money she'd stolen from the hospital. She had my house keys, my garage door opener, my alarm code that she'd seen me enter 1,000 times. While I was stuck at Jim's house, recovering and trying to figure out how to rebuild my financial life, Sarah had unlimited access to everything I owned. I asked Jim to drive me home that afternoon, and my hands were shaking as I turned the key in my front door. Walking into my own house felt like entering a crime scene. Everything looked normal at first glance, but then you start noticing the small things. The jewelry box my late wife had left me was open, and her wedding ring, the one I'd planned to give Sarah someday, was gone. The drawer where I kept emergency cash was pulled out slightly, completely empty. My laptop was missing from the kitchen counter, the spare checkbook I kept in the desk drawer, gone. Even my coin collection, something I'd been building since Sarah was little, something she used to help me organize every Sunday afternoon, cleaned out. But finding my house ransacked wasn't the worst part. The worst part was finding her number still worked when I finally called her. "Dad?" Her voice sounded so normal, so concerned, like she hadn't just destroyed my life. "How are you feeling? How did the surgery go?" For a moment, I almost broke down, almost told her how scared I'd been waking up alone, how much I'd needed her. But then I looked around at my empty house and found my voice. "Sarah, I know what you did." Silence, long, heavy silence that told me everything I needed to know. "Dad, I don't know what you're talking about." But her voice had changed, gotten smaller, defensive. "My wallet, Sarah. My phone, my keys, the money you took from my accounts while I was unconscious on an operating table. Dad, you're confused. The anesthesia can mess with your memory. Maybe you misplaced." "Don't." My voice came out harder than I'd ever spoken to her. "Don't you dare gaslight me about this. I raised you better than that." That's when she dropped the act. Her voice turned cold, harder than I'd ever heard it. "You want to know the truth, Dad? Fine. You've been treating me like a charity case for months, always making me feel guilty for needing help, always acting like such a martyr. Sarah, I took what I deserved." What I earned putting up with your guilt trips and your disappointment every time I couldn't pay you back fast enough. The line went quiet, except for the sound of my heart breaking into pieces I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to put back together. After she hung up on me, I just sat there in my empty house, surrounded by the evidence of how little I'd meant to my own daughter. You know that feeling when you're drowning, but you're not in water. When you can't breathe, but your lungs are working fine. That's where I lived for the next few weeks. I stopped eating properly. What was the point? I'd cooked for Sarah so many times, taught her my mother's recipes, watched her face light up when I made her favorite Sunday pancakes. Now every meal felt like eating cardboard, every kitchen memory poisoned. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake replaying every moment, every conversation, looking for signs I'd missed. Was she lying when she said she loved me? When she called me her hero? When she hugged me goodbye after every visit and whispered, "Thanks for everything, Dad"? I started questioning everything I thought I knew about being a father. Maybe I had been too controlling with my help. Maybe I had made her feel small. Maybe this was my fault somehow, for raising a daughter who could look at her unconscious father and see an opportunity instead of someone who needed her. The isolation was crushing. How do you tell people that your own child robbed you? How do you admit that the person you love most in the world, the one you'd have died for without hesitation, had calculated the exact moment when you'd be most vulnerable and struck like a predator? My friends tried to help, but what could they say? She'll come to her senses. She's just going through a rough patch. Blood is thicker than water. All those empty phrases people use when they can't face the truth that sometimes blood doesn't mean anything at all. I found myself driving past her apartment at night, not to confront her, but just to see if her lights were on, to know she was real, that I hadn't imagined 28 years of loving someone who never existed. The worst part was when I'd see her car there and feel relief. Relief that she was safe, even after what she'd done to me. That's when I knew I was broken. When you're grateful that the person who destroyed you is okay, you've lost more than money or possessions. You've lost yourself. The moment everything changed was probably the most ordinary moment you could imagine. I was sitting in my kitchen on a Thursday morning, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, when my neighbor Jim knocked on the door. "You look like hell," he said, not unkindly, as he walked in, without waiting for an invitation. That's the thing about good neighbors. They know when to ignore politeness and just show up. He sat down across from me and was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that cut right through the fog I'd been living in. "My son stole from me too." I looked up at him, really looked at him, for the first time in weeks. Jim's son David had died in a car accident 5 years ago. I'd been at the funeral, had brought casseroles for weeks afterward. I thought I knew everything about Jim's pain. "Before he died," Jim continued, his voice steady but his hands shaking slightly, "David took $8,000 from my retirement account to buy drugs. I found out a month after we buried him." He paused, staring out my kitchen window. I spent 3 years hating a dead man and another 2 hating myself for hating him. "But Jim, that's different. David was an addict." "No," he interrupted, "it's not different. Addiction, entitlement, desperation, doesn't matter why they do it. What matters is what we do with the pain after." He told me about the therapy he'd finally started, about learning to separate the person he'd loved from the choices that person had made. David was my son. He was also someone who stole from me. Both things can be true at the same time. That night, I called a therapist for the first time in my life. It felt like admitting defeat, but Jim was right about one thing. I couldn't keep drowning in this anger and grief. It was killing me slowly, and Sarah had already taken enough from me. The therapist, Dr. Martinez, asked me a question in our first session that I'll never forget. If Sarah had been anyone else, a stranger, a friend, even another family member, would you spend this much energy trying to understand why they hurt you? The answer was no. If anyone else had done this to me, I'd have called the police, pressed charges, and moved on. But because she was my daughter, I'd been torturing myself, trying to find the magic combination of words or understanding that would make her the person I'd thought she was. That's when I started to understand the difference between loving someone and losing yourself in that love. It's been 8 months now since I woke up from that surgery to find my life turned upside down. 8 months of learning how to live with a grief that doesn't have a name, because how do you mourn someone who's still alive but no longer exists in your world? I changed all my locks, got new bank accounts, bought a security system for my house. These weren't just practical decisions, they were symbolic ones. I was choosing to protect myself, even from my own daughter. That felt like both a failure and a victory. The money Sarah stole? Most of it's gone forever. Insurance covered some of it, and I've been slowly rebuilding my savings. The material things she took can be replaced, but there are some losses you just learn to live with. My wife's wedding ring is out there somewhere, probably sold for a fraction of what it was worth to me. I try not to think about that. Sarah tried to contact me twice. Once through my sister Linda, asking if I was ready to talk like adults. Once through a letter that arrived on my birthday, full of the same justifications and blame shifting I'd heard on that terrible phone call. I didn't respond to either. Some bridges, once burned, are meant to stay ashes. People ask me if I miss her, and the honest answer is complicated. I miss the daughter I thought I had. I miss the relationship I thought we shared. But I don't miss the anxiety of waiting for the next crisis. The next time she'd need money she couldn't pay back. The next time I'd have to choose between helping her and protecting myself. The hardest part isn't the anger anymore. Therapy helped me work through most of that. The hardest part is accepting that the Sarah who used to fall asleep on my chest watching football, who called me her hero, who hugged me so tight after her mother died and promised we'd take care of each other, that Sarah was real, but she's gone. The person who took her place looks the same, sounds the same, but she's someone I don't recognize. I'm learning to be okay with not understanding why she did it. Some questions don't have answers that would satisfy us anyway. What matters is that I survived it, and I'm slowly finding my way back to a life that has room for happiness again. Jim still checks on me most mornings. We've become closer friends through all this, bonded by this strange fraternity of fathers who've been wounded by their own children. We don't talk about it much anymore, but we don't have to. Some pain is just understood. I'm still Sarah's father. That will never change, but I'm not her victim anymore, and that makes all the difference.